My name is Margaret Brown, and I am 62 years old. For most of my life, I expected my golden years would be spent in quiet dignity, tending a small garden, maybe traveling once in a while, or joining the knitting club at church. What I never imagined was that I'd spend them raising 3 boys who weren't mine to raise. 3 boys who had been abandoned by their mother, my only daughter. And yet here I was, sitting in a courtroom that smelled faintly of varnished wood and old radiator heat, clutching an envelope worn soft from 15 years of my fingers tracing its edges. Across from me sat my daughter, Rachel Brown Hastings, 38 years old and looking every bit the picture of a polished professional. Cream-colored blazer, glossy waves of hair falling perfectly into place, skin flawless under carefully applied makeup. She didn't glance at me. She didn't need to. Her very posture screamed defiance. 15 years ago, Rachel had knocked on my door with 3 toddlers clinging to her legs. She was 23 then, exhausted, tear-stained, barely holding herself together. Just for a while, she'd said, dropping their small backpacks by the door. I need a little space. That little space turned into months, then years, then silence. And now, after vanishing for more than a decade, she was back. Not to apologize, not to reclaim the years she'd missed, but to accuse me of kidnapping. The word tasted like rust in my mouth. For a second, I forgot how to breathe kidnapping, as though I had stolen them, instead of being the one who stayed. Her lawyer, a tall man with a slick tie and an oily voice, rose. Your Honor, my client has been denied access to her children for 15 years. We are requesting immediate custody and pursuing kidnapping charges against the defendant, Mrs. Margaret Brown. The judge, Harold Morrison, leaned forward, his lined face impassive. His silver hair caught the pale fluorescent light. He was a man who'd seen every form of human cruelty pass through his courtroom, and yet he studied me with a curiosity that told me he was still searching for the truth. Mrs. Brown, he said, voice steady. Is it true you've been caring for your grandsons since they were toddlers? Yes, Your Honor. My voice did not tremble, though my heart did. Behind Rachel, in the second row, sat the 3 reasons I hadn't collapsed long ago. Daniel, 17, sat in the middle, tall and strong, his jaw clenched in that familiar way that reminded me of his late father. He was always the protector, always the one who spoke first when the others couldn't. On his right, Marcus, with gentle eyes and a quiet soul, twisted his hands together until his knuckles whitened. Marcus had always felt more deeply than the others, his empathy a double-edged sword. And on the left, David, the youngest by just 12 minutes, sat slouched with his gaze glued to the floor, his glasses slipping down his nose. He had always been the thinker, the cautious one, the boy who needed answers to questions too heavy for a child to carry. They didn't yet know what I held in my hands. They didn't know about the envelope. Inside was 15 years of proof photographs of birthday parties, report cards tucked into plastic sleeves, doctor's notes with my name signed again and again as the emergency contact, permission slips, field trip forms. All the evidence that being a mother wasn't biology. It was showing up. It was sacrifice. Rachel shifted in her seat, and for just a flicker of a moment, I saw something cross her face: guilt, fear. Then the mask slid back into place. Her lawyer continued, Your Honor, my client suffered from postpartum depression and substance dependency. She required time to heal. That does not diminish her parental rights. I wanted to laugh, but the bitterness stuck in my throat. Parental rights. Did rights tuck in 3 feverish boys at night? Did rights sew Christmas pajamas out of cheap fabric because there wasn't money for store-bought ones? Did rights attend every science fair, every baseball game, every parent-teacher conference? Judge Morrison raised his eyebrows slightly, and his gaze shifted back to me. Mrs. Brown, do you have documentation of your guardianship? I rose slowly, my knees aching, my body reminding me of every year of sacrifice. The envelope pressed against my palm, impossibly light for what it contained. Yes, Your Honor, I said. But before I present official guardianship documents, I'd like to present something else first. The courtroom went still. Even the radiator's hum seemed to fade. I stepped forward and placed the envelope on the judge's desk. He frowned slightly. What is this? Proof, I said simply. Proof of what a mother really is. He opened the envelope, sliding out the first photograph. It was Daniel, gap-toothed and beaming on his first day of kindergarten, clutching a new lunchbox almost as big as his torso. Behind my shoulder, I heard a sharp intake of breath. One of the boys, maybe Marcus. Another photo, Marcus at age 6, clutching a blue ribbon from the science fair, tears streaking his cheeks from joy. Another, David at 7, his arms around my neck after his first successful ride without training wheels. His glasses crooked, his grin triumphant. But it wasn't just photographs. The judge's hands sifted through report cards, permission slips, teacher's notes written in my neat handwriting, medical records where my name appeared again and again as guardian. Every page was a story. A story of showing up. 15 years of mothering. Recorded not in words but in signatures, in sleepless nights, in choices made again and again in the name of love. The judge's voice softened, almost reverent. Mrs. Brown, how long did you compile this? 15 years, I whispered. 15 years of birthdays Rachel never called for. 15 Christmases where I explained. Again and again, why her voice never came through the phone. 15 Father's Days where the boys made cards for my late husband instead, because they needed someone to stand in the empty place their father once filled. I heard one of my boys make a sound, a muffled sob or a gasp. I couldn't turn to look. My own heart would break. Rachel shifted in her chair again, and I caught her staring at one photograph in particular, the 3 boys in matching pajamas, their arms wrapped around each other in front of our small, crooked Christmas tree. Pajamas I had sewn myself, because money was too tight for store-bought. The judge looked at Rachel. Where were you when this photograph was taken? Rachel straightened her back, her voice strained. I was getting my life together. You couldn't send a Christmas card. The judge pressed. You couldn't make a phone call. Her silence was an answer. The judge placed the documents back into the envelope and rested his hands on it, thoughtful. Mrs. Brown, he said finally, do your grandsons know what is in this envelope? I hesitated, my gaze flicking to the 3 young men who had once been babies in my arms. Not yet, Your Honor. And why not? My throat tightened. Because some truths are too heavy for children to carry. I wanted them to have the chance to know their mother without the weight of my judgment. But they are old enough now. Old enough to know the truth. For a brief, fleeting moment, Rachel's composure cracked. Real tears welled in her eyes. For a second, I saw the girl she used to be. The daughter who called me at 3 in the morning, when she was scared and pregnant. The daughter who once promised she'd be a good mother. But then I remembered the nights I held 3 small, trembling bodies through thunderstorms. The mornings I walked them to school in the rain. The years they had called me Mama, Grandma, because I was the only mother they'd ever really known. Love, I thought, is not a feeling. It's a choice. A choice you make every single day. Judge Morrison nodded slowly, folding his hands. Mrs. Brown, step back, please. My pulse roared in my ears as I walked back to my seat, the envelope between us like a silent witness. He leaned toward the boys, Daniel, Marcus, David. His voice was gentle but carried. I know this is difficult. But I must ask you directly, do you want to live with your mother? The silence stretched, taut as wire. Daniel's voice, deep and steady, broke it at last. Your Honor, he said. We don't really know her. The words fell into the quiet courtroom like a hammer strike, reverberating against every wall. The silence after Daniel's words was so sharp it seemed to cut the air itself. We don't really know her. I watched my daughter flinch, her lawyer stiffen, and my 3 grandsons sit taller, braver, older than their years. But Daniel wasn't finished. He cleared his throat, his voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. Would like the chance to try. The words gutted me, and yet, I understood. They were boys caught between blood and love, between biology and memory. They wanted to believe there was something left to salvage. The judge nodded slowly, his eyes unreadable. Then he reached for the manila envelope again. He pulled out another stack of papers and began leafing through them, his silver brows knitting as he read. Report cards, he murmured. Teacher notes, medical authorizations. His voice softened. Your name, Mrs. Brown, appears on every single one. Yes, Your Honor. My voice wavered for the first time. I remembered each one, the field trip permission slip to the zoo that Daniel had begged me to sign. Marcus's dental form where I had scribbled allergies none. David's authorization for asthma medication after too many nights of panicked wheezing. Each page was a piece of a mosaic I'd built out of necessity. The judge looked up. And your daughter's name? Not once, I said quietly, The words echoed in the room like a gavel strike. Rachel's lawyer jumped to his feet. Your Honor. My client was suffering from postpartum depression. She needed treatment, stability, time. I turned sharply, cutting him off before I could think better of it. My voice was low but firm. And what about them? Did they get time? Did they get treatment for the nights they cried themselves to sleep calling for a mother who never came? Did they get stability when they hoarded crackers under their beds because they weren't sure if food would be there tomorrow? The courtroom went still again. My mind flashed back. Daniel at 4, clutching my skirt while sobbing. Grandma, will Mommy come back? Marcus hiding cookies in his pillowcase until ants invaded his bed. David jumping at every creak of the hallway, thinking it might be the sound of her footsteps. Postpartum depression, addiction. Labels, yes, but labels that didn't soothe broken children in the dead of night. I swallowed hard, returning my gaze to the judge. I'm not saying my daughter wasn't struggling. I'm saying the children were struggling too, and only one of us showed up. For the first time, Rachel shifted in her chair, and her mask slipped. Her lips trembled. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table. I saw fear there, real raw fear. Judge Morrison pulled out one more photo from the envelope. He held it up for the room. It was Christmas 10 years ago. The boys, age 10, standing in front of our small, crooked tree in the corner of my cramped apartment. They were wearing the matching flannel pajamas I had sewn myself, too tight around the ankles but loved nonetheless. Their arms were wrapped around each other, their faces glowing with joy. Where were you when this was taken, Ms. Hastings? The judge asked Rachel directly, her composure cracked. I was getting my life together, she stammered. You couldn't send a card, make a phone call. His voice remained level, but the steel beneath it made even her lawyer sink back into his seat. Rachel's eyes darted to the gallery, as though searching for someone to rescue her. But there was no one left to help her weave her story. The judge carefully set the photograph down and folded his hands. Mrs. Brown, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Do your grandsons know the full extent of what is in this envelope? I shook my head. Not yet, Your Honor. And why not? I drew a deep breath, the words like stones in my chest. Because some truths are too heavy for children to carry, even when they are nearly grown. I wanted them to know their mother without my judgment hanging over them. But they are old enough now. Old enough to see what love really looks like. For a fleeting moment, Rachel's tears spilled, real tears, not the ones she conjured for effect. For just a second, I saw my daughter again. The young woman who had once called me at 3 a.m, terrified of the future. The girl who promised she would do better. But then I remembered the weight of 3 small boys curled against me during thunderstorms. The pride in their eyes when I clapped at their baseball games. The sound of their voices calling me Mama, Grandma, because, in their hearts, I had been the only mother they'd ever known. Love, I thought again, is not a feeling. It's a choice. A choice you make every single day. The judge leaned back, studying all of us. I will review this evidence carefully, he said. But make no mistake, this is not just about rights. This is about responsibility. And I intend to weigh both. Rachel's face paled. She knew she was losing control of the story. And I knew as I sat down that the envelope had only begun to tell the truth. The envelope lay on the judge's desk, its contents spread out like pieces of a shattered mirror. Photographs, report cards, medical slips. Every scrap of paper testified to 15 years of motherhood I had never asked for but had embraced with everything I had. Judge Morrison's eyes lifted from the pile and settled on me for a moment. Then, deliberately, he turned toward the 3 young men seated behind Rachel. Daniel, Marcus, David. His voice was steady, neither harsh nor gentle, but carrying a weight that pressed on everyone in the room. This court can review documents, weigh testimonies, and listen to arguments. But none of that matters as much as what you want. You are nearly adults. I need to hear your voices. Do you want to live with your mother? The silence that followed was unbearable. My pulse roared in my ears. Daniel straightened first. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted. The very image of his late father at 17. His jaw worked as though he were chewing gravel. Your Honor, he began, his voice deeper than I remembered. We don't really know her. The words landed like stones in the still air. Rachel flinched, her hand twitching against the table. Daniel. She started, her voice sharp, Quiet, Miss Hastings. Judge Morrison cut in, his gavel rapping lightly. You will not interrupt your son. Daniel's eyes never left the judge. She's our mother by blood. That's a fact. But facts don't make memories. Facts don't show up for scraped knees or science fairs. Facts don't sit in hospital chairs at 3 in the morning. His voice caught, just for a second, then steadied. My grandmother did that, not her. I pressed my lips together, fighting the tremor in my chest. Marcus shifted in his seat. His hands twisted in his lap, but when he finally looked up, his eyes were glistening. I remember, he said softly. I was 8. She came back once. She stayed for 3 days and then she was gone again. I thought she'd changed. I waited at the window every evening after that, thinking maybe she'd come back again. But she never did. His voice broke. I don't know if I can believe her anymore. David, the quiet one, adjusted his glasses, his gaze still fixed on the floor. When he spoke, his words were calm. Precise, like he'd rehearsed them 100 times in his head. She's a stranger to me. And I don't trust strangers. He paused, then added. But I would like to know if she can change. I don't know if I believe it, but I want the chance to see. Rachel exhaled shakily, relief flickering across her face. She reached for the moment like a drowning woman clawing at driftwood. The judge raised a hand to silence the stir of whispers in the gallery. His expression was grave, unreadable. He looked back at the boys, then at me. So, he said slowly, what I hear is that you do not know your mother. You do not trust her. But you want the opportunity to try. Daniel's jaw tightened. Yes, Your Honor. My heart splintered. The words were fair, honest. Spoken from the place of children who had grown into men craving answers. But each syllable felt like a nail driven into my chest. Rachel's lawyer leaned forward quickly. Your Honor, this is precisely why my client deserves custody. These boys deserve the chance to reconnect with their mother without interference. The judge's eyes snapped to him, cold as steel. Without interference. For 15 years, Mrs. Brown was their only interference between survival and abandonment. His tone dropped lower. Do not presume to lecture this court on family when the evidence speaks for itself. The lawyer shrank back, his mouth snapping shut. Rachel's face was pale now, her carefully painted exterior cracking at the edges. She tried to mask it with tears, real ones this time. But the effect was no longer as convincing. The judge tapped the envelope lightly, as though sealing its testimony into the record. This court will honor the boys' request, he announced. A trial period of 2 weeks with their mother, after which they may return and inform the court of their decision. The words struck me like a hammer blow. 2 weeks. 2 weeks in which everything I had built could be undone. 2 weeks where love might be outshone by wealth, by promises, by blood. My fingers dug into the wooden bench. I wanted to cry out to protest, to beg them not to go. But love, I reminded myself, is not possession. Love is letting go, even when it tears you apart. The gavel struck once. Court adjourned. We drove home in silence. The courthouse walls had been suffocating, but the silence in my old Honda was worse. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, arms folded tight across his chest, his eyes fixed straight ahead. In the back, Marcus leaned against the window, his expression unreadable, while David hunched over, staring at his hands as though answers were written on his palms. I gripped the steering wheel, every muscle in my body stiff. 2 weeks. The judge's words looped in my mind like a broken record. 2 weeks to try. 2 weeks in which they'd live with the woman who had left them behind. When we pulled up to our apartment building, its bricks weathered and patched from decades of rain, Daniel finally broke the silence. Grandma, you don't have to cook tonight. We can order something. I shook my head, forcing a smile. No, sweetheart. We'll have dinner together. Like always. Inside, the apartment greeted us like an old friend. The worn couch sagged in the middle from years of movie nights and wrestling matches. The family photos lining the hallway seemed to glow in the soft evening light. On the fridge, college brochures and scholarship letters were pinned alongside childhood drawings and magnets from flea markets. I moved automatically through the kitchen, pulling out pasta and tomatoes, grounding myself in routine. The boys shuffled in after me, each taking their usual role as Marcus filled the pot with water, Daniel chopped onions, and David set the table, grumbling about homework assignments as he always did. We moved like a well-practiced symphony. 15 years of habit, of togetherness, of survival. Dinner was quiet at first. The clatter of forks and the bubbling of the sauce filled the silence until Marcus spoke softly. She wants us to move to Seattle. My heart clenched. She showed us pictures, David added, pushing his glasses up his nose. The house has a pool. And our own rooms. I kept my voice steady. That sounds nice. Daniel dropped his fork with a clatter. It doesn't matter if it has a pool. A pool won't fix 15 years. His jaw was tight, his voice edged with anger. Marcus reached across the table, touching his brother's arm. We just need to see for ourselves. His voice trembled. I need to know if she means it this time. I swallowed the ache in my throat. How could I blame them? Every child wants to believe their mother can change. After dinner, I made hot chocolate. The same way I had every night since they were small. 3 mugs, whipped cream on top. A ritual that had carried us through fevers, heartbreaks, and exams. As we sipped, Daniel finally looked at me. His eyes were so much like his father's, steady and piercing. Why didn't you ever tell us everything? About her. About why she left. The envelope sat on the counter, silent and heavy. Because I wanted you to hope, I thought. Because hope is the only thing that kept you from breaking. Aloud, I said. Because children shouldn't have to carry their parents' failures. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. We're not children anymore. No, they weren't. Somewhere between scraped knees and algebra homework, between baseball games and late-night talks, my little boys had become men. I nodded, my throat tight. You're right. Later that night, after they retreated to their shared bedroom, I sat alone in the living room. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old radiator. I stared at the photographs on the wall. First days of school, science fairs, birthdays, Christmas mornings, proof of a life built from scraps and sacrifice. My phone buzzed. A text message lit the screen. Rachel, the boys seemed upset. I want to talk. Let's meet tomorrow. Rosewood Cafe, 2 p.m. I stared at the message, my chest tightening. Even now, after court, after years of silence, she thought she could control the narrative. I typed back 2 words, I'll come. Then I set the phone down, my hands steady in a way they hadn't been all day. If Rachel wanted to talk, then she would finally hear the truth. The next morning, I found the envelope still sitting on the kitchen table. Its edges were frayed from years of handling, its weight unchanged, and yet it seemed to grow heavier by the hour. The boys drifted in one by one. Daniel was first, already dressed for school, his hair combed back neatly. Marcus followed, still in pajama pants, moving slowly like he was carrying something invisible on his shoulders. David trailed last, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his glasses slipping crookedly. They sat together on the couch, shoulder to shoulder, the way they had since childhood. Always a unit. Always together. Daniel cleared his throat. Grandma, we need to know. Marcus leaned forward, his voice softer. Why did she really come back? Why now? David pushed his glasses up, his eyes sharp despite the sleepiness. Is there something you're not telling us? I sank into my armchair across from them, my hands folded in my lap. I had dreaded this moment for 15 years. Dreaded the day when the shield I'd built of half, truths and silence, would finally shatter. She was 23 when you were born. I began slowly. Your father was overseas. I was working 2 jobs. Your grandfather was fighting cancer. She was young, overwhelmed, and drowning. And my voice cracked. I told her she needed to be stronger. That motherhood required sacrifice. I thought I was helping. But I wasn't. David frowned. That explains leaving us with you for a while. But not 15 years. I reached for the envelope and pulled out a folder I had kept separate from the rest. The paper crackled as I placed it on the coffee table. This came in the mail last month, I said. Your father had a life insurance policy, a substantial one. It was set up to be released when you turned 18. And since Rachel is still listed as your guardian on the original documents. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel's jaw tightened. She'd get the money. I nodded. All of it. Unless the court recognized me as your guardian. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. So that's why she came back. Not for us. For money. David whispered it like a curse. $1.2 million. They looked at each other, then back at me. Their faces carried the weight of boys who had just been forced to grow up even faster. Daniel pushed away from the couch, pacing toward the window. So this wasn't about family. It was about a payout. She's not even hiding it, is she? She sued you for custody so she could cash in early. Marcus covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. All those years I thought she'd knock on the door again. All those birthdays I thought maybe she'd call. It was always about money. David sat very still, his silence more terrifying than his words. I leaned forward, my voice breaking. I never wanted you to carry this. I wanted you to keep some hope alive. That maybe one day she'd come back for love, not for gain. But you're old enough now. Old enough to know the truth. Daniel turned sharply. So why did she wait until now? We're 3 months away from turning 18. Why sue now if she could just wait? My stomach twisted. I had hoped to spare them this last detail, but they deserved to know. I slid another paper across the table, the ink stark and damning. Because 6 months ago, she filed to have me declared an unfit guardian. I said quietly. If she had won that petition, she would have regained custody before you turned 18. Which means she would have had immediate access to the insurance money. The boys froze. Marcus's tears stopped, replaced by shock. David's lips parted, but no sound came out. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, his entire body trembling with barely contained rage. She never wanted us back, David said flatly. She wanted the money. The words hung heavy in the small apartment. And in that silence, I realized the truth was no longer just mine to carry. It belonged to them now, and it was going to change everything. Daniel's fists slammed against the windowsill, the sound echoing through the small living room. So all this time, 15 years, she was never coming back for us. Not once. It was always about money. His voice shook with fury, deeper than I'd ever heard it. I wanted to reach for him, to calm him, but he turned on me, his dark eyes burning. And you knew. The words sliced through me. Daniel, no, his voice cracked raw. You knew and you kept it from us. You let us believe she might change. You let us hope. Do you know what that did to us, Grandma? To sit at every birthday, every Christmas, waiting for a phone call that never came. Marcus's tears spilled silently down his cheeks. He didn't speak, but his shaking shoulders said everything. He had always been the dreamer, the one who clung to hope the longest. And now, I had just ripped it out of his hands. David pushed his glasses up his nose, his voice steady but cold. Why are you still protecting her? The question stunned me. I'm not. Yes, you are. His words cut sharper than Daniel's rage. You kept the truth from us because you wanted us to have some picture of her that wasn't real. You wanted to protect her. Or maybe protect us from hating her. But we're not kids anymore. We don't need illusions. We need the truth. I sank into my chair, my hands trembling in my lap. I wanted you to have something I never did. I whispered. Hope. Because once hope dies, it never comes back. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. Stop protecting her. And stop protecting us. We're not babies anymore. The silence after his words was deafening. My chest ached, as if my heart itself had cracked open. I wanted to explain that every lie, every omission had been made out of love, out of desperation to shield them from a pain I thought would crush them. But now, looking at their faces, older, sharper, hardened, I realized they were right. They weren't children anymore. I closed my eyes, forcing back tears. You're right, I said softly. I'm sorry. Daniel's anger faltered, the fire dimming in his eyes. He knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in his much larger ones. His grip was warm, grounding. Don't apologize for loving us, Grandma, he said, his voice breaking. The words undid me. Tears spilled freely down my cheeks, 15 years of exhaustion and fear leaking out at last. Marcus reached for my arm, his face streaked with tears but his touch gentle. David sat forward, his gaze steady. His silence filled with a kind of painful understanding. We sat there together, 4 people bound not just by blood but by choice, by sacrifice, by years of shared pain. Then my phone buzzed on the table, shattering the fragile peace. A new message. Rachel, the boys seemed upset when I left. We need to talk before their decision. Meet me tomorrow. Rosewood Cafe. 2 p.m. My chest tightened. Even after everything, she still thought she could script this story. I looked at my grandsons, their eyes red, their hearts heavy. And I knew the time for silence was over. The Rosewood Cafe hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same scratched tables, the same humming espresso machine. The same smell of roasted beans mingling with old wood. It was here that Rachel used to sit as a teenager, hunched over her homework, while I worked the late shift at the diner across the street. I arrived early. choosing the corner table where she once scribbled algebra problems and doodled hearts in the margins. Back then, she still called me Mom. Back then, I still believed she would grow into the woman I prayed for her to become. At exactly 2 o'clock, Rachel swept in. Cream-colored coat draped perfectly. Hair shining as though she'd just stepped off a salon chair, her heels clicking against the tile like punctuation marks. Heads turned. She had always known how to command a room. "Mom," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. The word was stiff, rehearsed. "Rachel." My voice was calm, neutral, but my eyes searched her face. Beneath the expensive clothes, the makeup, the posture, there were lines. Fine cracks etched around her eyes, not from laughter, from fear. She ordered a skinny latte with oat milk. Of course she did. I stuck with black coffee. Some habits never changed. The waitress left, and Rachel leaned forward, her voice dropping into a familiar pleading tone, the same one she had used as a teenager when she wanted the car keys. "The boys seem confused. I can tell you've been filling their heads with your version of events." "My version?" I asked quietly, as if abandonment is just a matter of perspective. Her eyes flashed. "I was sick. Postpartum depression is a real condition." "I couldn't." "You couldn't call for 15 years. My voice cut like glass. "You couldn't send a letter. You couldn't show up at a single birthday." For a flicker of a moment, something raw cracked through her mask. Regret, maybe. Or fear. "I wanted to," she whispered. "But the longer I stayed away, the harder it became. How do you explain to 3 little boys that their mother just left?" "You don't explain," I said coldly. "You apologize, you come home, you do the work." Her face flushed, anger replacing tears. "I was building a life!" "No." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "You were running away. And now you're back. Because that life you built requires funding." She flinched as though struck. "That's not true." I reached into my purse and laid a folder on the table. Neatly organized documents slid across the scratched wood like tarot cards predicting her downfall. "Your boyfriend's investment firm is under federal investigation. His assets are frozen. You've been living in a house you can't afford, your car payments are months behind, your credit cards are maxed out. And 2 months ago, you filed for bankruptcy protection. The same week you had me served with custody papers." Her lat sat untouched, the foam dissolving into beige puddles. She stared at the papers, her face draining of color. "How did you?" "I may be old," I said evenly, "but I'm not stupid." For a moment, the cafe bustled around us as if nothing had changed, students tapping on laptops, a couple laughing at the counter. But between us, the air was electric, charged with years of betrayal and lies. Rachel's mask cracked again. "They're still my children. I gave birth to them. I love them." I studied her carefully. The stranger who shared my blood. Love is not a feeling, Rachel. Love is showing up. Love is sacrifice. Love is choosing them every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She stared at me, tears pooling in her eyes, but her voice hardened. "What if I fight you? What if I take this to trial?" I gathered the papers back into the folder with deliberate calm. "Then I'll take everything to the media. Every lie, every abandonment, every dirty financial trail. I'll make sure the world knows who you really are." For the first time, I saw fear, real fear, flash across her face. But something else flickered there too. Defiance. She leaned back in her chair, her voice trembling but sharp. "You don't scare me. I'll never walk away. Not this time." Rachel's hands trembled against the table, her manicured nails tapping a frantic rhythm against the wood. Her eyes darted from the folder to me and back again, like a cornered animal searching for an escape. "You think you can shame me into walking away?" She spat, her voice too loud for the quiet cafe. A few patrons turned to stare. She lowered her tone quickly, but her words dripped with venom. "I made mistakes, yes. But they're still my children. You can't erase that." I leaned forward, my voice calm, steady, the way I'd spoken to fevered boys at 3 in the morning. "No one can erase biology, Rachel. But biology doesn't make you a mother. Choices do." Her face crumpled, then hardened. "You don't know what it was like. 3 babies, no husband, no money." My chair scraped the floor as I pushed back. My voice dropped, sharp as glass. "Don't you dare tell me I don't know. I raised those same 3 babies, with no husband, no money, no sleep. I sewed clothes out of scraps. I pawned my wedding ring to pay medical bills. I sat in emergency rooms through broken bones and asthma attacks. I worked 2 jobs until my hands bled. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. The difference is, I stayed. Rachel's tears spilled over now, streaking her carefully applied makeup. For a fleeting moment, she looked like the daughter I once knew, the young woman who had called me in the middle of the night, terrified of motherhood. But then her face twisted with bitterness. And what did it get you? An old apartment, an empty bank account, and 3 boys who will leave you the second they can. The words stabbed, but they missed their mark. Because I had already seen the truth in Daniel's fierce loyalty, Marcus's quiet tenderness, David's sharp honesty. They were not leaving me. They had already chosen me. I gathered the papers into the folder, my hands steady. What it got me, I said softly, was 3 men who know the meaning of love. Love is not a feeling, Rachel. It is showing up day after day, even when it breaks you. Especially when it breaks you. For the first time, Rachel's shoulders sagged. Her eyes flickered downward, her mask slipping completely. She looked small, diminished, like a child caught lying. But then, just as quickly, defiance returned. She straightened, her jaw tight. You won't scare me off. If I have to drag this through court for years, I will. I'm not walking away. I studied her, my daughter, and yet a stranger, and something cold settled in my chest. Then you leave me no choice, I said quietly. Her brows knitted. What's that supposed to mean? I stood, slipping the folder into my purse. You'll see. As I walked out into the crisp afternoon air, I felt the familiar weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. But beneath it was something sharper, steadier resolve. Rachel wouldn't walk away quietly. She never had. But I wasn't finished either. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the envelope. My last $1,000 rested in my checking account. Money meant for emergencies. This was an emergency. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had written on a crumpled scrap of paper weeks earlier. When the line picked up, I said, I need a private investigator. The call came just before dawn. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, dragging me out of the first real sleep I'd had in days. My heart lurched immediately. The reflex of 17 years as the emergency contact for 3 boys who seemed to live in hospitals, school nurse offices, and detention halls. I fumbled for the phone. Hello's Brown. The voice was clipped, professional. This is Detective Sarah Martinez with Seattle PD. I'm calling about your daughter, Rachel Brown Hastings. My stomach sank before she spoke the next words. I already knew. She was arrested last night on charges connected to her husband's federal case. Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. The room tilted. I sat up, my bare feet hitting the cold floor. What happens now? She's being held pending arraignment. She requested you be notified. The detective's tone softened, as if she already knew the history behind this mess. She also asked that you contact her attorney. I closed my eyes. Not relief, not satisfaction, but something heavier. Inevitability. Like watching a house collapse that had been rotting for years. No, I said finally. I won't be contacting her attorney. There was a pause. She said you'd say that. But she also asked me to pass along a message. She's willing to sign custody papers in exchange for legal representation. Even in a jail cell, she was bargaining, calculating. Using the boys as currency. I hung up without another word. By morning, the apartment hummed with the usual chaos. Marcus humming in the shower. David muttering about his calculus homework. Daniel moving quietly so as not to wake his brothers. Normal sounds. Precious sounds. But today, I knew everything would change. By lunchtime, their classmates would see Rachel's mugshot on the evening news. Teachers would whisper. Social media would explode. My boys would not be able to hide from this. I called them into the living room. Boys, I said softly, tapping the envelope on my lap. We need to talk. They emerged, still half asleep. Daniel, fully dressed already, stood with his arms crossed. Marcus slumped onto the couch, hair damp. David, his glasses crooked, blinked at me with that wary expression he always wore when he knew something bad was coming. Your mother was arrested last night, I said bluntly. The silence that followed was profound. 3 pairs of identical dark eyes stared at me, their faces shifting from shock to confusion to something I couldn't quite name. For what? Daniel asked finally. Financial crimes? I said, connected to her husband's business. Marcus's voice was soft, almost fragile. She going to prison, probably, I admitted. David leaned back, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. So it's true then. She didn't want us. She wanted the money. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. This isn't difficult, he said, his voice hard. It's clarifying. She didn't want us 15 years ago. She doesn't want us now. Everything else was just details. His brothers nodded, and for the first time I saw not grief, but peace. Grim, painful peace. The kind that comes when a question you've carried your whole life is finally answered. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. A Seattle number, I answered. Mrs. Brown? This is James Morrison, attorney for Rachel Hastings. My client would like to discuss terms. I hung up before he finished. Even behind bars, Rachel was still negotiating, still playing her games. But this time, I was done playing. That evening, the apartment felt heavier than usual. The radiator hummed, the scent of tomato sauce from dinner still clung to the air, but none of us moved. The boys sat across from me on the couch, lined up like soldiers before a briefing, their faces hard in ways that made my heart ache. I held the envelope on my lap. 15 years of secrets, sacrifices, and sleepless nights pressed into manila paper. Tonight, it could no longer stay closed. Before you hear it from anyone else, I began, my voice trembling. You need to know the whole truth. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped. About Mom, I nodded. Daniel's jaw clenched, the muscle twitching the way it always did when he was trying to keep his anger contained. David adjusted his glasses and gave a small nod, his eyes sharp, waiting. Your father had a life insurance policy, I said. $1.2 million. It was designed to be released when you turned 18. Rachel was listed as the guardian. Marcus's mouth fell open. David inhaled sharply. Daniel didn't move at all, though the heat coming off him felt like fire. I continued. She came back because she wanted access to that money. That's why she filed to have me declared unfit 6 months ago. If she'd succeeded, she would have had immediate custody and control of the money before you turned 18. The words landed like blows. David spoke first, his voice flat. So she never wanted us. She wanted the payout. Marcus whispered, his eyes glassy. All those years I kept thinking maybe she was getting better. Maybe she'd come back for us. He shook his head, tears sliding silently down his face. But it was just money. Daniel finally stood, pacing like a caged animal. And you knew? He snapped, spinning toward me. My breath caught. You knew this was about the money. You knew she filed those papers. And you kept it from us. His voice was like thunder, deep and furious. Why? Why didn't you tell us? I rose slowly, my knees aching. Because you were children. I didn't want you to carry that weight. I wanted you to hope, even if it was foolish. Hope. Daniel's laugh was bitter. Hope is poison when it's built on lies. His words pierced me deeper than any knife. David leaned forward, his gaze locked on mine. Stop protecting her, Grandma. Stop protecting us. We're not babies anymore. We can handle the truth. I sank back into my chair, tears burning behind my eyes. They were right. I had spent 15 years shielding them, building a wall between them and Rachel's choices. But they weren't boys with scraped knees anymore. They were young men, nearly adults, and the truth was theirs to hold now. You're right, I whispered. I'm sorry. The anger in Daniel's face faltered. He crossed the room and knelt beside me, his large hands wrapping around mine. Don't apologize for loving us, he said softly. The dam broke. Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and unstoppable. Marcus reached for my shoulder, David's hand rested on my knee. For a moment, the four of us were bound together by something stronger than blood, survival, loyalty, love. Finally, Daniel's voice cut through the quiet. So what happens now? 6 months later, I found myself in another courtroom. Different city, different judge. But the same daughter sitting across the aisle, pale under the fluorescent lights. Rachel wore an orange jumpsuit this time, her once perfect hair tied back limply, her face thinner drawn. She still carried herself with a kind of brittle pride, but the effect was hollow, like a porcelain doll cracked down the middle. The charges had mounted quickly: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Her husband had already cut a deal, trading testimony for leniency. Rachel, always certain she could outtalk any problem, had refused. Now, the jury filed back into the room. I watched the foreman stand, the paper trembling in his hand. Guilty, he said, on all counts. Rachel's head dropped into her hands. The judge cleared his throat. The sentence: 18 months to 3 years. With good behavior, release possible in 15 months. 15 months. By then, my boys would be sophomores in college, adults. Far beyond her reach, reporters swarmed as the bailiffs led Rachel away in cuffs. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved toward me, voices overlapping. Mrs. Brown, how do you feel about your daughter's conviction? Do you see this as justice or revenge? What do you say to mothers who? I raised a hand, silencing them with a single gesture. My voice was steady, clear, carrying across the noise. Justice, I said simply, is rarely satisfying. But it's necessary. And with that, I walked out of the courthouse, leaving the noise behind. The drive home was quiet, the hum of my used Subaru steady beneath me. The boys had insisted on buying it for me, pooling part of their insurance money. Safe, dependable transportation, Grandma. No more worrying about the old Honda breaking down. Daniel had said as he handed me the keys. When I pulled into the apartment, my phone buzzed. A video call request. I answered, and 3 familiar faces filled the screen. Daniel at Northwestern, his dorm room cluttered with papers. Marcus in a study lounge at Stanford, wearing his lab coat over a hoodie. David at MIT, surrounded by circuit boards and half-finished projects. We saw the news, Daniel said. Marcus's voice was gentle, but steady. Are you okay? I nodded. I'm fine. More than fine. David pushed his glasses up, his expression sharper than ever. She made her choices. Now she lives with them. The 3 of them exchanged glances, that wordless communication they had perfected since childhood. Then Daniel leaned closer to the camera, his eyes burning with conviction. Grandma, we've made our choice too. We're with you. Always. My throat tightened, tears blurring the screen. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift, just a little. Winter settled in gently that year. The apartment, once so cramped with teenage energy, now felt strangely quiet. The walls still bore the marks of growth. Tiny pencil lines measuring height, photographs of birthdays taped to the fridge. But the boys were gone, scattered across the country at universities that had once seemed like distant dreams. Every Sunday, though, they called, without fail. Sometimes individually, sometimes together. And every call began the same way. Hi, Grandma. How are you? And every call ended the same way. We'll love you. It was enough to keep me going through the long evenings. Then, one afternoon in early December, the video call was different. All 3 boys appeared on the screen at once, huddled together in what looked like Daniel's dorm room. Their faces were flushed with excitement. Marcus spoke first, his voice bubbling. Grandma, we have something to tell you. I smiled, wary. What are you up to? David leaned in, adjusting his glasses, his words precise as always. Wu bought a house. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. You what? Daniel grinned, that same crooked smile his father once wore. We made an offer. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a real kitchen, a garden out back. Plenty of space for when we're all home again. My hand flew to my mouth. Boys, you can't just. We already did. Marcus interrupted gently. With our inheritance money. Dad wanted it to secure our futures. Well, our future includes you, Grandma. It always has. Tears blurred the screen. I shook my head, overwhelmed. That money is for your education, your lives. David cut me off with a rare smile. Education is covered. Scholarships, grants, careful budgeting. We set aside enough for tuition and living expenses. The house money is separate. We planned this carefully. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady groan. You gave us everything for 15 years. Let us give you this, please. My breath caught. The weight of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar stretched until it tore. All of it suddenly seemed worth it. Because here they were, not just my grandsons, but men. Men who understood love, who carried it forward. When does it close? I whispered. Next month, Marcus said. We'll be home for winter break to move you in. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't dared to believe I could feel again. Hope. Real, solid hope for a future not built on fear, but on love. That night, as I sat in my old armchair, staring at the peeling wallpaper of the apartment that had sheltered us for so long, my phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. I opened it. Please. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need to try to make amends. The boys are my children too. Rachel. My chest tightened. Even from prison. She found a way to reach into our lives. I stared at the message for a long time, the weight of it pressing on me. And then I realized. The next choice wasn't mine alone. It was theirs. The message sat on my phone like a shard of glass. Please. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need to try to make amends. The boys are my children too. Rachel's words glowed on the small screen, fragile and pleading. I stared at them for a long time, my thumb hovering, my heart pounding. Forgiveness. It was a word I had wrestled with for 15 years. I had forgiven her absences 100 times, excusing them as mistakes, as fear, as illness. But this, after courtrooms, after betrayal, after watching her try to trade her own children for money, I didn't know if forgiveness still lived in me. That weekend, the boys came home for winter break. The apartment filled with noise again. Daniel lugging his duffel through the door, Marcus humming as he unpacked groceries. David already setting up his laptop on the kitchen table. For a moment, everything felt normal, like the years when they were still under one roof. After dinner, I showed them the message. My hands trembled as I passed the phone across the table. Daniel read it aloud, his voice flat. Please. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Marcus's brow furrowed. She's still trying. His voice held no anger, only exhaustion. David adjusted his glasses, his eyes sharp. Trying what? To worm her way back into our lives. To make herself look like a victim. Silence settled. The radiator hissed in the corner. Finally, Daniel looked up at me. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, locked onto mine. What do you want to do? Grandma. The question pierced me. Not what should we do? Not what do you think? But what do you want? After years of carrying the burden alone, the decision was mine. I thought of 3 small boys clinging to me through storms, whispering, Mama, Grandma, in the dark. I thought of sewing pajamas by lamplight, of hospital vigils, of scraped knees and science fair ribbons. I thought of every day I had shown up, and I thought of Rachel, her choices, her absences, her cold calculation. Slowly, I reached for the phone. Without hesitation, I pressed delete. She had her chance, I said softly, over and over, and she chose money instead of you. That's not a mistake. That's who she is. The boys exchanged glances, a silent current of agreement passing between them. David smiled faintly, a sad but resolute expression. Good. Marcus's hand covered mine. You're our family, Grandma, not her. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. We've been talking. We want to make it official. We want to change our last name. To Brown. My breath caught. He held my gaze. You're our mother in every way that matters. It's time the world knows it too. Tears blurred my vision. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding on by threads. I felt whole. The house smelled of fresh paint and possibility. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a real kitchen with enough counter space to spread out, and windows that flooded every corner with light. It wasn't a mansion, not like Rachel's hollow Seattle promise. But it was ours. When we carried the last box inside, Marcus dropped it with a theatrical groan. Remind me again why we didn't hire movers. Daniel smirked. Because we're broke college kids who spent everything on the house. David, already assembling a bookshelf in the corner, muttered. Also because Grandma doesn't trust strangers with her photo albums. I laughed, brushing a tear from my cheek. You're not wrong. We spent the day unpacking, lifting, sorting, laughing. Marcus insisted on hanging family photos in the hallway first, so it feels like home. Daniel set up the kitchen, labeling jars and rearranging spices until it looked like he'd been running a restaurant. David fiddled with the Wi-Fi router until he declared, triumphant, we're online. That night, we cooked our first meal together in the new kitchen. Chicken soup, simple and warm. Marcus chopped vegetables. David measured spices with surgical precision, and Daniel teased them both while stirring the pot. The air filled with the smell of garlic and broth. With laughter and the clatter of spoons against bowls, I sat back watching them move easily around each other, and my heart swelled. For 15 years, we had made do in a cramped apartment with a stove that barely worked and a table that wobbled. That apartment had been love-wrapped in scarcity. This was love-wrapped in possibility. After dinner, the boys gathered in the living room. Daniel cleared his throat, unusually formal. We have something to tell you, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? Marcus grinned. Not at all. He pulled a folder from his bag and placed it on the coffee table. Legal documents. I felt my breath catch. David pushed his glasses up. We filed the paperwork. Soon it'll be official. We're changing our last name. to brown. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. There it was in black and white. Daniel Brown, Marcus Brown, David Brown. My throat closed, tears spilling before I could stop them. Boys. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes steady. You're the reason we are who we are. It's time the world knows it. We're your sons. Always. I pulled them into my arms, all three of them, my tears soaking into their shoulders. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight of sacrifice transform into something lighter legacy. As we sat there in our new living room, my phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. I ignored it at first, but later, curiosity tugged. When I pressed play, a reporter's voice spilled through the speaker. Mrs. Brown, we'd like to interview you about your story. 3 grandsons raised by their grandmother. Now thriving in college. People need to hear this. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. And I knew our story wasn't just ours anymore. The voicemail from the reporter replayed in my head all night. 3 grandsons raised by their grandmother, now thriving in college. People need to hear this. I'd lived my life quietly. My story wasn't glamorous. It was stitches in pajamas, late nights at the hospital, secondhand furniture, and meals stretched on coupons. It was sacrifice, but it was private. And yet now, the world seemed to want it. The next morning, I found the boys already awake, gathered around the kitchen table with their laptops open. Daniel was scrolling through news articles. Marcus had a spreadsheet of financial aid statistics. David, of course, had already pulled up studies on grandparent-led households. Grandma, Daniel said, looking up, it's not just us. Millions of grandparents are raising their grandchildren. Most don't have resources. Most don't even get recognized legally. You could be their voice. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes shining with conviction. Think of all the nights you felt alone. What if another grandmother out there feels the same, and hearing you makes her realize she isn't? David adjusted his glasses, his tone pragmatic. You have credibility. You did it. Not many people can say that. If the media wants to listen, why not use it? I stared at them. These young men who had once been small boys clutching my skirt, and I realized they weren't just asking. They were leading. They were urging me to take the pain we'd carried and turn it into something bigger. My throat tightened. But what if sharing our story hurts you? What if people look at you differently? Daniel shook his head. Grandma, we've already lived it. Hiding it won't change what happened. Owning it will. The truth of his words settled in my chest like a key turning in a long locked door. That afternoon, I called the reporter back. My voice was steady. Yes, I'll do the interview. A week later, our story ran on the front page of the local paper. A photograph of me with the boys, standing in front of our new house. Smiles genuine despite everything. The headline read, Grandmother raises 3 abandoned boys into college men. The response was immediate. Letters poured in, emails from strangers, phone calls from other grandparents thanking me for saying aloud what they had been living silently. Then, one evening, an email arrived from a national nonprofit. Mrs. Brown, we are hosting a child advocacy summit in Washington, D.C. We would be honored if you would share your story as our keynote speaker. I sat staring at the screen, my heart racing. And I knew our story was no longer just survival. It was becoming a movement. The airplane wheels touched down in Washington, D.C., and my heart jolted with them. I had never imagined that at 63, I'd be flying across the country, not for leisure, not for family, but to stand before strangers and tell the most painful story of my life. The summit was held in a grand hotel ballroom, its chandeliers glittering above rows of tables draped in white. Banners hung with bold letters, National Child Advocacy Summit. Beneath them, men and women milled about, carrying folders, sipping coffee, exchanging stories of policy and reform. I felt small. I felt out of place. My hands trembled as I smoothed my skirt. That evening, in my hotel room, the phone buzzed. A video call from the boys. Daniel grinned from his dorm, the glow of his laptop lighting his face. Grandma, you'll do fine. Just tell the truth. That's all you've ever done. Marcus's voice was gentle. Don't try to sound like them. Sound like you. That's why they asked you here. David leaned into the camera, his tone firm. You've carried us for 15 years. A ballroom won't break you. Their faith steadied me more than any rehearsal could. The next morning, my name was called. Please welcome Mrs. Margaret Brown. Applause rose as I walked onto the stage, the lights hot on my face. My knees wobbled, but I held the podium with both hands, grounding myself. I looked out over the crowd, hundreds of faces, expectant, waiting. I thought of the envelope I had carried into court, the manila paper filled with proof of love. And I began. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a grandmother. 15 years ago, my daughter left her 3 sons with me. She never came back. I raised them in a 1-bedroom apartment with hand-me-down furniture and coupons stretched thin. I sewed their Christmas pajamas from old fabric scraps. I sat through every fever, every broken bone, every science fair, every graduation. Not because I wanted to be their mother, but because I had to. Because love is not a feeling. It's a choice you make every single day. The room was silent, utterly still. I saw people leaning forward, tissues lifted discreetly to eyes. My boys are in college now. I continued, my voice firm. Not because of me alone, but because family, true family, chooses to stay. And I'm here because there are millions of grandparents like me, doing the same thing in silence. We need to recognize them, support them, because the future of those children depends on it. When I finished, the applause rose like a wave, thunderous and unrelenting. My knees nearly gave out, but this time from relief. Afterward, as I stood by the refreshment table, hands still shaking, a woman approached. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a guarded smile. Mrs. Brown, she asked softly. Yes, my name is Celia Hastings. I believe we need to talk. It's about Rachel. My breath caught. Celia's eyes were steady, her voice low. I was married to Robert Hastings before Rachel. My breath caught. The name alone was enough. Robert, the man Rachel had been with when the financial crimes unraveled, the man whose shadow had darkened her choices. Celia glanced around the busy conference lobby, then leaned closer. Robert destroyed lives long before the indictment. He was charming, powerful, ruthless. When I left him, I thought I was free. But then I saw Rachel with him a few years later. She looked trapped, like I once was. I clenched my hands. Trapped doesn't excuse abandoning your children. Her eyes softened. I know. But I also know Robert had a way of twisting people until they didn't recognize themselves. He wasn't just a fraud in business. He was a fraud in life. He needed people who would bend, and Rachel, she bent. I closed my eyes for a moment. For years, I had painted Rachel in the darkest tones, selfish, greedy, heartless. And here was a stranger suggesting there had been strings attached all along. But then I remembered my boys. Remembered every stormy night, every tearful bedtime, every whispered, "Mama, Grandma." She still made choices, I said finally. My voice trembled but held. She chose him, she chose money. She chose silence. And I chose to stay. Celia studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Yes. And maybe that's the difference between you and her. You chose love. When I returned home, the boys were waiting. I told them what Celia had shared. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice quiet. So maybe Mom wasn't just greedy. Maybe she was lost. David adjusted his glasses, thoughtful. Lost or not, she still hurt us. That doesn't go away. Daniel's jaw was firm, his tone decisive. We can understand her story without excusing it. But it doesn't change our choice. Our family is here, with you. The 3 of them looked at me then, eyes steady, strong. And I realized Celia's words, true or not, didn't change the ending. My boys had already chosen their path. That night, as I sat in our new kitchen, surrounded by warmth and noise and the smell of dinner, I understood something I hadn't before. Rachel's story might have been about escape, about compromise, about collapse. But ours, mine and the boys', was about endurance, about love that refused to die, even when tested. And maybe that was the real ending, not revenge, not punishment, but legacy. Spring sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, catching the steam rising from a pot of soup. The house was full again, Marcus humming as he chopped vegetables, David explaining a half-finished project sprawled across the dining table, Daniel reading a draft of an article aloud. Their voices overlapped, rose, and fell, weaving a song I had lived with for 15 years. My boys, my sons. I leaned against the counter, letting the sound wash over me. So many nights I had feared silence. The silence of waiting for a door that never opened, a phone that never rang. Now the house was alive, and the silence was gone forever. Rachel's shadow still lingered in headlines and memories, but she no longer defined us. Her story had been one of choices made in fear and greed. Ours was one of choices made in love. The boys carried their father's strength, their grandfather's kindness, and yes, pieces of their mother too. But more than anything, They carried the legacy of endurance. They had taken the pain of abandonment and turned it into determination. They had chosen to be men of character, not bitterness. That night, we sat together at the dining room table. Plates piled high, laughter echoing off the walls. Daniel teased Marcus about his medical textbooks. David challenged them both to a chess match. For a moment, I saw them as children again. 3 boys in pajamas, faces sticky with hot chocolate. Tears stung my eyes, not from sorrow but from fullness. I raised my glass. To family, I said. They raised theirs in return, voices steady. To family, later. When the house quieted and the boys sprawled across couches in sleep, I sat alone for a moment. The journey had not been easy. It had been marked by courtrooms, betrayals, sleepless nights, and sacrifice that nearly broke me. But it had also been marked by laughter, by whispered, "Mama, Grandma," by triumph sewn from scraps and love stitched tighter than blood. I realized then that justice had never been about court rulings or prison sentences. True justice was this. 3 young men who knew what love meant because they had lived it. Rachel's punishment was not the prison bars that confined her. It was the empty chair at this table, the milestones she would never witness, the joy she would never feel. And my reward was here: warmth, laughter, legacy. For the first time in decades, I felt peace settle over me, whole and unshakable. The story was no longer about survival. It was about love that chose to stay. And that, I thought as I looked at my sleeping boys, was the only ending that mattered. Sometimes family isn't defined by blood, but by the people who choose to stay when others walk away. Love isn't a promise whispered. It's the sacrifice lived every single day. We can't control the choices others make, but we can decide how we respond, with strength, with dignity, and with love. In the end, true justice is not revenge. It's the legacy of love we leave behind. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to Telling Story with me for more real stories of family, betrayal, and resilience.